Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to switch to English if you guys don't mind. So what I'm going to tell you about is a little bit of a global view from my experience working around the world, all the way from Australia to the US to Europe and also in Israel, about the connection between customer service and cities, and smart cities particularly. So a few words about myself. I'm originally a finance guy. I've worked in finance for many, many years, mostly in Asia Pacific. I grew up pretty much all around the world. You can see this is a map of my first few years. I did my first grade in 4 different countries. So my early view of cities and of different nations was very, very developed of different experiences. And this impacted me later on in my journey throughout my career. So what I'd like to start telling you about is my personal experience, my customer experience as a resident traveling to work for 15 years in Sydney, Australia. And if you can close your eyes for a minute, if I can ask you to close your eyes and imagine your journey to work every day here in Israel. So if you're opening your eyes now, this was my experience for about 15 years, going to work every morning, seriously. Right now, I've been in Israel now for about 4.5 years, and I love this place to death. But to be very honest with you, this is my experience on a day-to-day basis. And we're seeing this in many aspects of life, that our customer experience from a city perspective is lacking. But what I'm here to tell you is that this is going to be changing very, very significantly. So let me start with our view of what makes a city exceptional. So in our company, we've been working with cities really all around the world, and we've started working on this formula, a specific formula for how you create exceptional cities, for how you create an exceptional resident experience for your residents or for your citizens. And more specifically for this conference and for your focus area is how do exceptional cities deliver exceptional service? And this is a relatively new realm in the municipal realm that we're going to be talking about. But first of all, how many of you have heard of smart cities? So the term is all around. Everyone's speaking about smart cities all around the world. And we did a little bit of a desktop research, and we saw that smart cities are going to be generating $40 billion, right? And there's some phenomenal growth charts that are being explored and investigated all around the world. The reality, if you ask me, is that not many people know what this means. This is a mystery. This is a great chart. There's great circles. There's great kind of bars. But quite frankly, the value of customer service, the value of smart cities is missing, and not many people actually know what to do with it. And mostly when I'm with mayors around the world, I get questions about what the hell smart cities are, because it's a big question and not many people know how to tackle it. And so what I'd like to do with you here today is to redefine what we talk about smart cities, to redefine the value that we deliver in a city, redefining value in the context of a city or in the context of a country, and to try and understand how value is delivered to residents or to customers in that context. And so let's look at some great cities from around the world, right? Who doesn't love New York? Let's think about the value that is delivered to the residents of New York City. You know, some great values that are delivered there in terms of the neighborhoods, the feeling. It's mostly emotional things that you can kind of put your hand on your heart and think about. The romance of Paris, Amsterdam. And so the question is, what makes these cities deliver a greater service than, in the case of New York, than some city in the US, or Nice, or Rotterdam, than Amsterdam? What makes our cities be great cities, be exceptional cities? Is it the mayors? Is it the mayor's role to make a city great, to deliver great customer service to the people living in the cities? Some would say that great mayors have a great impact. But it should be more than that, shouldn't it? And so what we tried to do is we tried to take a simple framework and to put together in a simple framework what makes a city exceptional. And so we put together this little triangle and we asked the question, what makes a city exceptional? So in Israel, we love going back into history, and particularly we have the city of Jerusalem here, so historical references are very much in place. And so I would have to start with where cities came from, why people are moving to cities, why over 50% of the world's population today lives in cities and has moved away from farms and from rural areas. And the reality is because cities are safer. They created some sort of a safety net that people didn't have before when they were living in the rural areas. So that's the first thing that created the city structure when it was originally built. And again, the city of Jerusalem is a great example of the city walls that make it a safe place to be. But then we got more sophisticated and we started getting other things like infrastructure, roads, buildings, energy grids. It was very much driven by infrastructure. The whole foundation of cities, the whole foundation of municipalities was driven by building great infrastructure that would create trade and commerce and would deliver services to us residents. So once we had all of our infrastructure in place, we had energy, we had roads, we had buildings, we need systems. We needed some systems in order to help build on top of these. And so we had different systems that we developed. We had medical systems, we had educational systems, we have transportation systems, that we developed in order to make sense of the infrastructure that was built. And at the top of this pyramid, at the very top of this pyramid, is the resident. And when we look traditionally at cities, the resident has very little impact into a decision-making process on an infrastructure or on the systems. In fact, the resident has two critical points of impact on this triangle. One happens once a month, and one happens once in every 4 years. So you can guess that they vote, and you can also guess that they pay taxes. This is traditionally the major impact that residents have on cities, traditionally around the world. And so I would say that the traditional way cities are built, they're built bottom up in this triangle. They're built very much driven by infrastructure. What we've noticed is that some cities are changing this formula and starting to deliver great customer service or great customer experience by changing this formula and actually flipping it on its head. I'm going to give you one great example of the deputy mayor, of the former mayor of Paris, that had an issue that he had to deal with as a mayor. And this happens, has anyone been to Paris in August? Paris is very, very hot in August, right? No one likes to be in Paris in August, and in fact, most of the locals escape to the beach, go north in August. The reality is that some people need to stay in the city because they can't afford to go to the beaches, and this group of people gets very, very depressed. And the mayor got a report on his table saying that there's an entire group of people that are really depressed in August because they can't go away to the beachside, to the northern beaches of France. And we call this Parisian depression of August. And so the mayor decided to change the equation. Rather than building infrastructure to support traffic or different sectors of the city, he said, I'm going to solve the problem for this group of people. And what he did was he brought 5,000 tons of sand from the Riviera and 100 palm trees, and he put them straight in the middle of Paris. And he created a virtual beach for people that had to stay in Paris over August. And essentially what he was doing was delivering great customer service to residents that had to stay in Paris during August. So asking the right questions by the mayors, by the director generals, by heads of departments and municipalities is critical in order to be able to create great services. And so, you know, the story about the Parisian beach is a simple story. Let's look at a bigger issue. So in Paris, they're lying on the beach, but what about the issue of pollution? How does a mayor, how does a director general, how does a head of a department deal with pollution? And the answer is that it's very, very difficult for cities to deal with such big issues because often they don't even control the entire realm of pollution. So governments would approach dealing with pollution with big global strategies like the US or the EU do, increasing energy efficiency, reduction in CO2 emissions, and renewables. These are big strategies, but they're not very effective. So I'm going to tell you a story that I researched over many months. I actually interviewed 20 different mayors from around the world, and this is predominantly the best story that I've heard, and I'd like to tell you this story. This is Louisville in Kentucky. I don't know if you know Louisville in Kentucky, but it sits on the Ohio River-based valley, and it gets a lot of pollution from factories around it, and there's not much that the city can do about it. It's a reality that they have to live with. And so, if we jump to the next slide. And so this is an image of what Louisville, Kentucky can look like on a very, very bad day. One day, the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky received a report to say that in Louisville, Kentucky, it's one of the top 20 cities that have a challenge for people to live in with asthma. So I don't know if anyone here suffers from asthma. Louisville, Kentucky is traditionally not the place for you. And so the mayor wanted to try and investigate how he could solve this problem from a resident perspective, how he could improve his customer service, his resident services, in order to deal with this terrible statistic that said that his cities was one of the 20 worst cities to live in with asthma. And so this is the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, and he asked himself the following question. How do I improve the quality of life for people in my community living with asthma? And the first thing that he realized was that he's missing information. Listen to what he did. He did research on 3 factors in order to understand the real insights from people suffering from asthma. He wanted to find out where people were having attacks. He wanted to find out at what time they were having an attack, and he wanted to find out how bad these attacks were. It was critical for him to know these 3 factors. And so he took a private company that threw out thousands of these sensor-equipped enablers and started understanding the patterns. And this is what he saw. So this is a map of Louisville, Kentucky, and what you're seeing now is 1.2 million data points of people having asthma attacks over 13 months. For the first time, the mayor in the city was starting to understand what it actually looks like from his residents' perspective. He was starting to see where asthma attacks were happening, where bad asthma attacks were happening, and he was starting to formulate a strategy based on this data, based on understanding a sector within society, a group that had a real challenge. And so look at this, he started to put additional information on top of this. In fact, he put 5.4 million data points of raw data on top of this data. Ambient temperature, traffic, zoning, he threw anything he could think of on top of this. So first of all, they found out that the main traffic routes, these black routes, were a big cause of the problem. And so they started diverting main traffic routes away from these key areas and polluting buses away from these key areas. They also noticed another thing. Have a look at these 2 areas that have significant amount of asthma attacks. This area, for example, has no trees. This is where trees are deployed in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. They're all around here, but there's nothing in the areas that are hit badly by asthma. So they started deploying these trees along the main neighborhoods, along the main thoroughfares, and they realized that this was having a significant impact. And these were normal trees. Today we have trees with nanotechnology that's able to absorb far more of the CO2 emissions and the pollution that we're seeing in transportation. And the results are astounding. Without changing the health system, without adding new clinics, he reduced 82% of asthma rescue inhaler use within his city within a short period of time. Okay, so focusing down on residents, focusing down on resident groups give us great insights. And so we realized that by doing the big picture things that we've been trying to do, we're not going to be able to solve traffic. This is not going to change. Adding 2 more lanes here is not going to change anything. Adding more parking spots is not going to fix our parking problem. We spoke about pollution, some of the issues that we're having. And so the question that I would like to ask you is, can we create new resident classifications to better understand our residents, and to help focus our services in a better way? And in fact, what that means is that what we need to do is we want to understand who this guy is, who this guy is, who that guy is, and who this guy is or girl is. And we want to understand exactly what kind of customer service they expect on their way to work. What are their expectations from that journey? Because in reality, the reason they're stuck in traffic is because all those cars back there are empty. In Israel, on average, in a car driving in the center of Israel, there's 1.2 people. That means that all cars that we're seeing around us are empty. The statistic, and this is an amazing statistic, is if we increase that number from 1.2 to 1.5, we get rid of traffic jams for about 5 years. That could be done, but in order to do that, we need to understand what people's journeys consist of, where they're going, how we can get them to pool better, how we can get them to take public transportation. We need to get into the minds of our residents, or of our consumers, of our customers. So we've been taking a bottom-up approach. I'll give you 2 examples and I'll end on that note, and I'll be happy to speak to you directly. And that bottom-up approach has been working with municipalities around the world to help them organize their data, to help them take all these big question marks of open data and regulatory data and data from residents and GIS data, and putting them together in sensible frameworks. And then what we do is we take the old frameworks of cities, transportation, health, education, waste, security, and we start breaking those down, because those don't work. A head of transportation alone cannot do anything in his city. A head of health department cannot do anything in his city. So what we start doing is we start collecting challenges, and on the basis of this, we start creating resident clusters, and we try to deal with these as customers, very much like in the commercial world. And so the 2 examples that we're working on right now, this is Melbourne, and this is disabled residents in the city of Melbourne. This is real life data from open data from residents in the city of Melbourne. And essentially, from doing some data analytics through our systems, what we discovered was that there is a major difference between transportation and mobility of disabled people versus non-disabled people in certain areas. The minute that information gets to the mayor or gets to the head of transport, he can do small things that can make a big difference to people. He can put some ramps at specific train stations, or he can make certain changes that will make it very different for disabled people to be able to get better access and to reach some sort of equality without millions and millions of dollars. You can make small changes based on these data insights. A relevant example to Israel is we're working with the city of Herzliya, with the deputy mayor there, Maya Katz, and we're doing a project to understand accessibility of soldiers. And we know that soldiers kind of the soft spot for Israelis. And we know that sometimes they have a very, very difficult time getting to their bases all around the country, and sometimes in very remote locations. And I see people nodding significantly to say yes. The reality is that our cities don't really know what happens to their own soldiers when they leave the city. They kind of trust the system, and the reality is that many of them get stuck along the road. And if the city only knew specific soldiers on specific days when it's very hot, or when it's raining, or on specific holidays, where those interjections, where those spots where the soldier has to wait for 2.5 hours in a bus station, if they knew this, they would be able to make small actions like giving the soldier, some money to go into a restaurant, or maybe taking even a private bus from the municipality to increase the customer service for their city. So we're using data today, and I just gave you a couple of examples, to better understand who our residents are, to better understand who these residents are in a customer-focused lens. And we hope that by working with mayors all around the world, we can create a great customer experience for residents all around the world. Thank you.